Joel Embiid was quoted as saying, "At this point, I don't care about that man. My job is not to babysit anyone." So a very spicy quote from my guy Joel.
That wasn't bad. That was not bad.
Had to loosen up the throat a little bit for that one.
You might need a lozenge after that.
Man talks like he has a frog in his throat.
Let me put you on game.
Good, man. The NBA is back and it feels so good. So many exciting games and storylines that we'll get into. But let's go ahead and get the homework out of the way. Let's talk about Ben Simmons, because just like the Kyrie Irving situation, it's gotten to the point where it's a must discuss because of how many interesting things are going on. So for our listeners who engage with us but aren't the biggest basketball fans, I think you'll find this situation pretty interesting regardless of if you like hoops or not. So I'm going to give you the basic rundown. Basically, Ben requested a trade during the summer, and things have not gone so well since that request. So he reported to practice recently after saying that he wasn't going to report and refusing to report. And he was reportedly disengaged at practice while participating in full speed drills. And he also had sweatpants on and a phone in his pocket. And when he was asked by Doc Rivers twice to participate in defensive drills, he refused both times, and Doc sent him home. So he literally took his ball and went home. Daryl Morey, the head honcho for the Sixers, was quoted as saying that he is willing to wait this out for 4 years if it means that they get a difference maker for Ben Simmons. So he is dug in. He's in the trenches. He's in it for the long haul. He will not bend or break to Clutch or Ben Simmons' demands. And the Simmons situation has had a really negative impact on the team as a whole. Joel Embiid was quoted as saying, "At this point, I don't care about that man. My job is not to babysit anyone." So a very spicy quote from my guy Joel.
That wasn't bad. That was not bad.
had to loosen up the throat a little bit for that one.
You might need a lozenge after that.
Man talks like he has a frog in his throat. But Ben Simmons actually met with the Sixers medical professionals and the coach, Doc Rivers, on Friday, and he informed them that he is not mentally ready to play up to his expectations now. And he also talked to his teammates in a players and a staff meeting. Joel Embiid reportedly asked him why he requested a trade, and Ben said that he wasn't in the right place mentally. Joel allegedly didn't respond. So things are going swimmingly in Philadelphia. He had some support from his other teammates like Tobias Harris, where he said that, he's ready to embrace him whenever he wants to come back. But with all of that in mind and the developments over the last couple of weeks since we talked about it, and the Philly fans were calling him a trash can floating down a river, what are your impressions of the Ben Simmons situation, and how do you think it resolves going forward?
So I'm just tired of this tomfoolery, of these shenanigans. The man doesn't want to be here. I don't want to question anybody else's mental health and all of that stuff, but it seems like he's mentally unhappy because he didn't get what he wanted. If he's depressed, it's because he sold his house, said, Clutch was like, "Yo, man, you're going to get up out of here. Don't worry, get rid of it all, make a statement, act a fool," and it's not working. And if he's disappointed, I think he really needs to just look himself in the mirror and figure out why everybody's disappointed in him. He's in a no-win situation because obviously the Sixers aren't going to trade him, as Maury said, unless for like peanuts or for, nickels on the dollar. They want full value for him. And that means that he has to ball out in order to get traded. And it seems like he doesn't want to ball out in Philadelphia for those 76ers fans. So he's found something of a happy medium where if he cites mental issues, then he kind of gets a pass, because there's a stipulation in the CBA that permits players to, not be with the team if they cite mental health issues. I really pray that that's not the case and that he's legitimately troubled. I don't want someone to be legitimately troubled, but I pray that he's just not, that he's actually being truthful about this. Because if he isn't, it's really nasty for the guys who are actually struggling out there and who show up despite that. Whereas
Of
he's just
course.
not getting what he wants and is not showing up. So I hope that that's not the route that's going. But I don't see the situation changing unless he starts balling out of control and makes himself good trade bait for one of these teams that are struggling and that need a difference maker. How about you?
Yeah, I have two sides of me, and one side of me is kind of leaning the way that you were talking about with the mental health thing. The cynic in me, like, kind of wants to think that it's a PR spin,
Mm,
because especially in the world that we live in 2021, mental health is such a big discussion, especially for athletes, because of the pressures and the things that they have to deal with when it comes to their performance and their lives off of whatever playing field or court that they play on. So with that kind of discussion and kind of in the public space, it's very difficult for anyone to say that he's not telling the truth. So it's almost like he has like a trump card in this situation where he can pull that out and like no one can question it. So that's the
yeah.
cynic in me. But the empathetic part of me understands that what he's potentially going through and what he had to deal with in terms of the public scrutiny from basically everyone. He wasn't just being scrutinized by um, the fans of opposing teams or the fans of Philadelphia. He was also being scrutinized by his own teammates in the entire city. So it's a lot to deal with. So I can imagine the damage that it did to his psyche, especially when you look at his performance leading up to what was the biggest failure, which is the dunk attempt that he passed up, like his free throw shooting during the series, his shot attempts during the fourth quarter. Those are all indicative of someone who's in their own head and who's dealing with something. So like
Yeah.
I see both sides of it. I think maybe the truth is probably somewhere in between, where he's probably actually being mentally affected by all of this, but Clutch
Mm,
and him decided like, hey, like let's use this since Philadelphia wants to play hardball, and we'll use this to our advantage to actually get what we want. But it's a tough situation because both sides, I think, are really at fault. I think obviously Philly threw him under the bus by simultaneously managing to tank his confidence and his trade value in the span of like 30 seconds with that Doc Rivers interview. And I think Ben is at fault because realistically, he has not gotten better offensively, like in any real, tangible, significant way since the beginning of his career, which
mm,
is really atypical. Players typically don't get worse or stagnate that much in one particular area. So obviously he's a standout defensive player. He's one of the best defenders in the NBA. He's one of the best defenders in the last 10 years. But offensively, he has no jumper. He's a terrible liability at the line to the point where you can't play him in games. And it's been well documented by Kevin O'Connor and by other shooting coaches that he's actually shooting with the wrong hand. And he refuses to try it the other way, because if you look at his floaters, you look at his layups, you look at every other shot that's not a jump shot, it's with his right hand, but his jump shot is with his left hand. So it's like
mm.
there's so much going on there. And then uh, if you want to look at another player, like people have been saying, Ben, just do what Giannis does, drive to the rim, dunk on everyone. And I don't think that that's realistic for Ben, because Giannis is a one of one. What Giannis does is only what Giannis can do. But what Ben can do and what Ben could take from a guy like Alonzo Ball or a guy like a Giannis Antetokounmpo is that they've improved at what their deficiencies were every year over their career. Alonzo used to shoot the ball at the side of his face like this and then bring it to the middle, but we actually see
Yeah.
that he has a functional jump shot. Giannis is actually a serviceable mid-range shooter, and he's a below average three-point shooter, but he's actually developing his game. So it's fault on both sides, but I don't know how they resolve this. I have no idea, but it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. But I wanted to ask you about, between this and the Kyrie situation, what do you think this means for player empowerment going forward? Because there's going to be a new CBA at some point where they're going to negotiate the power dynamic between the players and the owners. So, what do you think these, I guess you want to call them public tantrums by players, mean for player empowerment going forward?
So what's interesting is that this public tantrum idea is quite often a narrative that gets played by the media as well as people who are affiliates of the league and stuff, and sometimes even the teams themselves, so that they can get the public on the side of the teams and not really on the side of the players. And as a player, you just they've done a really fascinating job of making players sound selfish, silly, and self-centered when they're just looking out for their own best interests, just like the team is always going to look out for their own best interests. So that's an interesting sidebar in just the context of how we conceptualize these player strategies of when they're trying to do, when the teams want them to do a certain thing, but the players don't. But going forward for player empowerment, I think it's really interesting that these guys are making these stands and these stances, and it's going to come to a head. I think the GMs are starting to get a little bit emboldened, which you see with the case in Phoenix, where they decided to let DeAndre Ayton go into restricted free agency. The situation in Philly, other players like Karl-Anthony Towns saying WTF, but he's still a part of the team and he's still playing. And I think that it's going to hurt the players in the long run, because ultimately you want to show good faith, as well as if the players do what they're supposed to do, the team is going to also do what they're supposed to do in terms of trusting them, in terms of giving them a decent amount of leverage. But if you see guys like Anthony Davis, like Zion, like James Harden kind of play these games where they're playing chicken with the ownership, with the GM saying, okay, trade me. Okay, I really don't like this. Okay, I'm really not happy. I think that the owners are going to try to take back some more control so that they don't feel like they are losing control of their ship, which I really get, because some of these players can really just disrupt the whole franchise by a tweet or by body language.
I feel that, bro. I'm definitely a pro player. I think, it's been pretty clear from our conversations on the podcast, but I think that it is a bit of an overcorrection in terms of how much power the players are. Well, I wouldn't say how much power. I think players should have as much power as they need to have, but the misuse of that power, I think, has been what is the thing that I have the problem with. Like if you want to look at like the Zion situation, Zion could very well be the first player of his stature to refuse a rookie extension, take a qualifying offer, and then become a free agent. But the notion around Zion right now is he's going to just take the contract from the Pelicans and then just request a trade anyway. So if you're the Pelicans and the other organizations, like, what does the contract mean anymore? Like, Ben Simmons has 4 years left on his contract. So realistically, what does the contract mean? So like with Ben, like I think, or James Harden or these other players, we're seeing them not necessarily working with the organizations to get a trade. If you want to get a trade, I think you're perfectly within your means to do that. No one should be forever beholden to whatever team they're drafted by. But I think that we're seeing players not working with the team and tanking their trade value and leaving the team like empty-handed. Like at least just play the games or be around the team if you're not going to play, and then be somewhat positive and help them help you, rather than like completely just burning the bridge and then tanking your trade value and making it a spectacle and then just doing your old team a complete disservice so you can get to your new one. I think that we're seeing that with a lot of these players. So I think that there's going to be a reckoning, and I don't necessarily think that it's unjustified because of the way that some of the players have been conducting themselves. But I think it'll be interesting going forward to see what happens. But I hate to see like player empowerment being turned into something so like I guess flimsy and on a whim, depending on what the players feel at that particular moment.
Yeah, and I think that the overarching message is be a professional. We all have elements of our job that we love and elements of our job that we can't stand, and it doesn't behoove you and your coworkers to be cantankerous in the locker room, to cause a distraction, to make the people in the press conferences ask you questions about your teammate that you kind of know him peripherally, but you're not necessarily deep in his mind. And now you're being forced to ask questions and answer questions about Ben Simmons and say that, yeah, I support him, despite how you actually might feel on the inside, because you know that you're representing a bigger organization and that organization has priorities that you want to honor and that you want to win a championship with. So my overall message to these guys: fight for what you want, but be a professional about it, and be mindful of what you're putting out there, because it matters.
It definitely does.